I always like to level set everyone's sort of understanding. Omnichannel means a lot to a lot of different people, specifically within life sciences. What would you say is omnichannel marketing? And how have you approached sort of that, level setting of everyone's understanding of it? How would you kind of describe it in your words?
Yeah. I think we've tried for many years now in life sciences and pharma to standardize a definition of omnichannel. And I don't think we're quite there. And quite honestly, I don't know if we'll ever get there, because I think, to your point, I think everybody has a different interpretation of omnichannel and what it means for their organization or for their brands. To me, I would say omnichannel is that aspirational goal of being able to deliver that right message at the right time, through the right channel, to the right customer. And that could be an HCP, or that could be a consumer that's not on treatment yet, or that could be a patient that's on treatment. So to me, that's the North Star. I think in order for us to do that, we have to take a very data-driven analytical approach, a more targeted approach to our customers, and ultimately, a personalized approach as well. And the next question is probably, well, what's the difference between multi-channel and omni-channel? I think we get that question a lot, and I think we're still trying to figure out what's the difference between the two. And to me, I think multi-channel, which is something we've been doing for so many years, you have sort of the standard sort of channels for engagement with customers, but you have data that sort of sits within the channels and the tactics, and it's very siloed. And so you're dealing with disparate data sources. It's not all coming together. It's not providing you with those holistic insights and understanding about your customers. And in many ways, it's still kind of a one size fits all, right? And so I think with omnichannel, it's more about, again, taking that sort of data-driven, holistic approach, getting that deeper understanding of the customer. I would say it's also, involving more strategic thinking and strategic planning in terms of, what do you know about your customers? What are those, barriers? What are those drivers? What are those insights? And how do you use that to design an engagement strategy and experience for that customer, where you're thinking about the content strategy, you're thinking about the channel strategy, you're thinking about your measurements, and you're really sort of bringing all of that together and then activating that through your omnichannel approach. And it really has to be, especially from an HCP perspective, it really has to be connected between how the HCP is engaging through digital non-personal channels, and also how the HCP is engaging with your field teams. So, and that all has to really be synced up and connected.
I think that's great. I agree with you. I don't think we have landed yet on what the definition is. And in a way, I'm actually excited about that. I think that, a healthcare provider, I think of journeys, right? A healthcare provider in the day-to-day is practicing medicine. They're seeing patients. They are treating disease, whether it be chronic or acute. And you have, along that journey, a patient comes along, and you want your product to be top of mind when that patient presents with the need, and you think about the shift in consumer brands. I've talked about this in the past, other speaking engagements. Loyalty has been the new, engagement has been the new loyalty, excuse me. So if you think about the shift about, 7-10 years ago in consumer brands, they've moved to engagement models. I can argue, and many can argue, that in our industry, engagement has always been loyalty. And so if you really think about, commercial models in our industry of the past, large sales forces, large share of voice out, you really were delivering that message so that HCP could come to your product when that patient presented. And then we shift to what you just talked about, multi-channel, incorporating digital channels. It's the same. It's really getting your message to the right audience, to the right healthcare provider or the right patient or the caregiver, so that when there's a need for your product, of course, you're targeting in the right way, but when there's a need for your product, that magic happens. And, the evolution here is omnichannel brings all of that together from a data and insight perspective. And so it is not a one size fits all model in life sciences. I believe the engagement aspect is really, really key to all of this. And, omnichannel could sort of be a dirty word sometimes in some organizations who haven't had a lot of success. And so my advice has been shift to more engagement, right? I mean, you are a customer engagement professional expert. And I think that engagement aspect is really, really key. And that engagement aspect helps us and marketing teams shift from a product-centric approach to a more customer-centric approach. And if you really think about it, that's what we've all been striving for. That's what we want to get to. That's the North Star for me. And so rather than have a definition for omnichannel, maybe it's a definition for customer centricity and how omnichannel can enable that customer centricity and putting that customer in the center.
Yeah.
It sort of sparks another question in my mind is, why is it important? And, I talked a bit about this engagement piece, but I'd love to hear your thoughts around, why is it important in this ecosystem? I mean, we've been successful. I think we do. Many brands are successful. And, engagement models vary, commercial models vary, but why would this be even relevant topic at this point?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think there's multiple validated studies that show that experience matters for our customers, both for HCPs and for consumers and patients. They want that relevancy in terms of that information, that content that is specific to their needs, specific to how, they treat patients or how patients consume information along the different stages of the journey. So we really have to be more targeted and personalized in the way that we can. And there's data that clearly shows that has impact in terms of patients getting on treatment, staying on treatment, and also HCPs, prescribing our products. I think you mentioned the consumer experience, and in many ways, pharma is very different than CPG and retail like Target and Amazon. Great examples of companies that have done omnichannel so well. But I think one of the benefits and advantages in working in pharma is that we are a data-rich industry. I mean, we have data, pretty much you ask for it, and that data exists, right? Whether it's, RX data, claims data, behavioral data. I mean, there's just so much, the data is ubiquitous, right? But I think the challenge becomes, how do you make sort of meaningful insight and actionable insight based off of all of that data sources? And that sometimes becomes a practical challenge for organizations.
Yeah, no, I think you bring up some really great points there. The value, in addition to what you've shared around the experience matters, I think experience is tied very closely to trust as well.
Yeah.
And, elephant in the room, our industry, the trust always gets challenged, right? But at the end of the day, when a treatment is needed for an unmet need, we are the ones who bring that innovation and that treatment to that patient. And so that trust is a long-term value creation opportunity for us. And I think that is where, when you have very consistent messaging, and you manage that experience throughout with every touch point. And we'll get into different touch points, but that's really when your brand can elevate to the next level. For me, as the brand is going through their journey of evolution, there's a very exciting time when you've got an approval and you're launching and, you're gaining a lot of momentum. And then what, right? And so I like to, and I know you and I have worked together on launch brands, I like to build in those trust factors up front. I don't know if you want to comment a bit on that. I do think that, launches are really special, but you can't overlook that long-term creation of trust and the value that brings all the way through the trajectory of the brand.
Yeah, absolutely. You're 100% right. I think, especially the role that we play within pharma and life sciences, trust is such a key factor in the successful outcomes that we're trying to achieve with our customers. And so I think we can't take it for granted. I think it is a great opportunity for us from an omnichannel perspective. And I think also specific to launches, because I think that's really the exciting area, right? Where you're planning, right? You're executing, but then you're also learning, right? And I think I don't know, I'd be remiss if I'm thinking about that quote from Mike Tyson, right? Where it's like, everybody has a plan until you get punched in the face, right? So, I think it's so true for launches, because, launches are also a learning opportunity. And so I think another key factor in omnichannel, especially for a launch brand, is that having that agility, having that ability to be able to get that data as quickly as possible based on what you put in the market and how your customers are engaging with it, and then being able to make ideally real-time optimization. You're optimizing your approach along the way, and you're refining so that you're becoming more effective, ideally. So I think that's really important for launches. What have you found from your experience, Shetal?
Yeah, I think in my experience, I've managed brands across the life cycle, right? I've come into situations where the trust aspect was lost with a brand, and for multiple reasons. It's a complex ecosystem within the industry, and so for multiple reasons. And so to regain that trust is incredibly difficult. It's not impossible, but I have found that your point, going back to this experience matters. It's the delivering the experience that you're orchestrating. It's the delivering the value of your brand consistently. And that's when you get to that, maximizing that trust level and maximizing the value, not just of the brand, but then what you bring from a services standpoint, and it goes beyond just the healthcare provider engagement when you start to think about and talk about trust, right? You go into caregivers, patients, all the services that you provide from an access standpoint, all of that is there as well. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to add that I think trust is also something that you can measure. Trust and loyalty is measurable.
Yeah.
It is something that you can actually gain insight from your customers directly. And I think, that's oftentimes overlooked, the importance of having that voice of the customer, and incorporating that into your KPIs.
Yeah. Yeah. Very, very true. Well, listen, I think we've laid a good foundation. What is, and what can omnichannel be? How do we approach it from a pharma perspective? Why is it important in life sciences and pharmaceuticals? I sort of want to shift our conversation, because I think that's just the level setting. We've worked together and create a program from ground up. And so I think I want to share with the audience what that's like. I started in an organization that had a really great multi-channel approach, very successful to marketing. And so the question really was, why omni-channel? Why bring this in? And what we just reviewed was part of the foundation of what I brought in as an executive to really think through, where do we go next? And, with the backdrop of, we were going to have multiple launches coming up in the next 3 years, and we still had a legacy portfolio of brands that we had to manage and take to and elevate to the next level. And so with that, I really thought through, how do we approach the next phase of our commercialization? And it became very evident that omnichannel and putting our data and information, number one, to work was really, really key. And the second was really building this experience across stakeholders and making sure that we have that consistency. So I put together a pretty bold and grand vision. Enter Tarak Shah, he comes in, and we get to work, right? And so, I started with the assessing the landscape, and I think that's where the foundation was laid. And so, in that realm, what's your advice from your experience, assessing the landscape in an existing organization that doesn't have the capabilities? How do you get started?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's similar to building a marketing strategy. And I think the approach that we took, I think it did start with your kind of bold overarching vision in terms of kind of setting the organization kind of along this course. But then, I think what was really important was that we had to get a baseline. We have to get an understanding of, current capabilities, operations, processes, so much, so on and so forth, right? Getting a flavor for, the talent within your organization, skill sets, strengths, so on and so forth.
Mhm.
And then I think it was important to do that sort of gap assessment, right? Identify those key gaps that we really need to address. And then along the same way, it was really important to co-create that vision with our key stakeholders, right? And really defining what is that future state we're trying to strive for, right, compared to our current state, and what does that look like for us? And then from there, that helps to kind of set that roadmap. That, to me, I think it's both external and internal facing,
Mhm.
right? I think the roadmap that helps achieve your vision, it has to be customer focused in the sense that what is the incremental value we're trying to create for our customers? And then from an internal perspective, it's okay, well, how is that going to impact our brands? How is that going to drive brand performance? And also, what are the capabilities internally we need to build and operationalize in order for us to achieve that, right? And to get to that vision.
Yeah.
And then, I'm sorry, go ahead, Shetal.
Yeah, I was going to actually, as you're talking through this, I want to kind of zoom in a bit on capabilities, skill sets. In an organization that hasn't adopted omnichannel, those potentially don't exist, right? And so, we had a bit of an approach there, but I just wanted to share my perspective on, there's a mix of build the current team skill sets to elevate and bring them on that omni-channel journey. And then there's also an aspect of bringing in new talent to also elevate the skill sets. And so it's not a one size fits all on a skill. I get that question a lot. That's why I wanted, as you were saying it, I was like, we probably should talk a bit about skills, and not what's required, but how you build the right team, because what's required is what's needed for the organization and what's needed for the brand or the program, versus what currently exists. So I don't know if you want to zoom in a bit on the skill set / capabilities part as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think when we talk about capabilities, we sort of break it into three buckets. People, process, and technology. Let's also kind of throw data into that bucket as well. I think overall, you have to consider and invest in all three areas. But really, depending on where you are in your omnichannel journey, in your omnichannel roadmap, you may need to sort of weigh more in one bucket versus the other. And I think, I would say when we were kind of on this journey, foundationally, it was really important for us to focus on all of those three areas. But I think the people piece of that, the people and the culture piece of that was so significant for us. And I think it's, for me, it was, how do we upskill our team, right? How do we upskill our marketing team, our sales organization, really all of the key stakeholders that are going to be part of this omnichannel approach? How do we, kind of get them to think a little bit differently about engagement with customers? Again, moving from more of like a multi-channel, maybe sort of tactic product-centric approach to more of a customer-centric approach, and really think about how the channels work together or should work together. How do we get data? How do we centralize data? How do we leverage that data? How do we create insights? How do we create more agility in terms of our decision making so that we can optimize? So those types of things, right? And then I think also from a content perspective, I think integrating omnichannel into the brand planning process, which is both a combination of kind of the people development piece as well as the process piece of it as well, right? Like I said earlier, it does require, I think, more strategic thinking, more strategic planning, really having those conversations, leveraging those customer insights, defining what it is you're trying to achieve with your customers at a segment level or at a cohort level, right? However you're sort of analyzing your customers, defining those objectives, and really kind of mapping out the content strategy. What are those content areas that you're going to focus on that's going to help sort of move the customer along to achieve that desired objective, and help through sort of that change journey. And then how to best sort of align that content to your channels, and even I would say aligning the channels to the content as well, right? Because you really have to understand, where are your customers going? What are they doing in those channels? How are they consuming information? How are they engaging, right? And those become really, really meaningful insights as you're planning your omnichannel engagement strategy. And then, of course, the measurements and the KPIs are so critical, right? So I think that's really important. And then obviously the technology data piece of that is so paramount and critical to omnichannel enablement as well, which I won't really talk too specifically about. But I mean, what I will say is, I think you just want to caution getting too bullish on the technology side of it, because I think sometimes organizations think, okay, omnichannel is okay, we just gotta bring in a marketing automation platform, we're gonna bring a data solution, we're gonna bring in a CDP, we're gonna bring in AI, we're gonna bring in a decision engine kind of, and that partially solves the problem, and those are great enablers, but really without addressing the people, culture, the development piece of that, and also making sure that you have clear kind of processes and models in place, that's going to help drive the outcomes that you need. It's not going to be effective.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's one of the actually key premises or key cultural aspects that I focused on. The technology stack is important, right? It is important. 2 points I want to make. One is, the talent, the culture, the internal aspects that you touched on are vital, because you can build the best. And actually, companies have spent millions of dollars on the best technology. They've actually built it internally. They've partnered, and then their omnichannel efforts have not really yielded the results that they were looking for. And it's because the miss was really on the people side, bringing people along. Any change, especially technology change, and omnichannel, you could say it could be potentially a technology shift and change, is a people change. And so that people aspect is really, really key, the internal people. But I also want to add and bolt on to what you shared is the external aspect as well. Every single agency, partner, contractor, tech provider, software solution provider, they all also have to fit within your culture. And I've always challenged teams, and this is where I was playing, is pushing my peers, my colleagues, and all of our colleagues to think about, are your partners making you better, making us better, and helping us accomplish our goals? Or are they just providing a service? There's nothing wrong with providing a service, but how do we elevate, especially at a time of immense change, and you're introducing something so new? How do you actually weave that into the organization's existence? And it's really that partnership that I was always looking for. And I think we did really well in bringing the right partners in. So I do think, I agree with you absolutely. Technology isn't going to solve it. It's not, omnichannel for me is not a technology exercise, but you can't get there without the technology either. You do have to have a CRM that's going to enable a next best action, or even a flexible targeting, right? You do have to have, a data strategy, and then a way to bring all of your data together. You've got to have machine learning capabilities. You have to have those foundations, but that's not the end result. That's an enabler to actually getting to the cultural and systemic change. You have to have the strategic aspects of making this shift happen. And I think you brought up some really great things around, building the capabilities internally, but I also believe that the partners that you work with actually help elevate the skill sets as well, through the questions they're asking, through the experience that they're bringing, et cetera. So I wouldn't overlook that aspect of it. The other thing that you talked a bit about is KPIs and goals. Obviously, you don't take on any endeavor, especially not such a big change endeavor, especially a strategic shift, without having the right KPIs defined. And I think the primary goal is really important. We talk a lot about, engagement, healthcare provider, touch points. We could have all sorts of measures around how we're succeeding in the roadmap, and meeting the milestones of this change effort. But at the end of the day, the true measure, the KPI, is, are we making a meaningful impact in revenue generation, product to patient, and top line, bottom line. And so I think that primary objective is really important. But from that objective, then you've got to ladder leading indicators, because those are certainly lagging indicators. So let's talk a bit about those, leading indicators and what other KPIs beyond ROI you should be looking at so that you can get to that ROI picture.
Yeah. I think this is it's such an important topic, and I think oftentimes maybe we struggle with how are you measuring the success of your omnichannel approach, and how are you articulating the value and the impact of your omnichannel efforts? And so I think to your point, I think it does need to have an overarching, ROI, brand impact type of KPI associated with it. If you're in a leadership role in your organization where you're focusing on, building more of these capabilities, and then, embedding these capabilities into your brands, and driving that adoption and utilization, you're really trying to focus on, what is that ROI sort of based off of your omnichannel investments, right? And that is something you should be able to measure. You should also be able to take it to that brand level, and ultimately, those omnichannel capabilities really need to support those brand objectives and be able to drive brand performance. So how you're measuring that in terms of sales attribution, marketing mix, so on and so forth. But then I think in terms of those leading indicators, I would say, I think you do need to kind of go into a little bit more of the channels and the tactics, and you have to be able to kind of see, what is the engagement within those channels, within those tactical programs, and being able to correlate that to future sales performance, to ROI impact. And I want to underscore, I talked about the customer impact of this, and I think that's a really important metric that also should be incorporated into your measurement framework. That you should have some type of feedback from the customer, whether it's net promoter score, whether it's customer loyalty, whether it's customer sentiment. I mean, there's many different ways you can sort of look at it and define it. But you also have to have, I think, that measurement that's helping you guide your efforts along the way.
Yeah, I agree with you absolutely. And I think it really then goes to sort of, how do you set up the right strategy, right? So strategy, measure. You can kind of go back and forth on this, but, developing that strategy was really, really key, Tarak. I think, we accounted for people, we accounted for process, we accounted for technology, but without the right strategy, it can fall short, right? And so I think your point is a really good one. In order to drive it, you've got to make sure that the content, the customer, channel strategy is all in place. I think we need to talk a bit about cadence here, because there's actually a comment that actually came in too. It actually says omnichannel program using a modular content approach. You can have all of this, but again, you don't want your campaigns to get stale. We don't want to get to a point where it's sort of just on autopilot. And how do you manage this? As you start to put these foundational pieces in, you get to a level of, I would say, I don't want to call it maturity, but a level of sophistication, perhaps, where you have to start to think differently. And so, I think introduce modular content. I think there's an opportunity there to enable a different level of tactical and strategic thinking and deployment. And so I would love to hear your perspective as programs mature. Where do you go?
Yeah. I think it depends on where you are on the roadmap, right? So, if you're an organization that's, really kind of building this from the ground up, and you're focusing on really kind of establishing, those foundational capabilities, modular content really may not make sense for you at that stage, because you're not, it's going to take a while to sort of to get there, right? You have to sort of work your way up. I think for more sort of, mature company that has kind of established capabilities, has, more or less kind of a content model in place, has, kind of more of those tactical pieces that enable a modular content approach across different channels, I think is where, that's probably a great opportunity to sort of now take that to the next level. But I think that strategic foundation is going to be important as well, right? I think you need to have, that customer segmentation. You need to have that sort of analytical sort of breakdown of your customers so that you can tailor that content appropriately to that specific customer. I think I like to call modular content, I think of it in terms of like the top line and the bottom line. I think there's a top line impact to modular content, which is, by personalizing the content to your customers, you have that ability to drive better engagement that should translate into better, into brand performance and into business impact, right? There's also, I think, a bottom line sort of benefit to this as well, in terms of more of that efficiency in creating content, deploying content through different types of channels, and being able to speed that up in terms of bringing that to market, reducing timelines for content creation, and for execution. So to me, I think there's a top line and bottom line benefit to it. What are your thoughts, Shetal?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think there's definitely a top line and bottom line. If you really think about, a typical, program, what most people chase after is the efficiency. It's the can I get, more content out there in a more efficient manner, or create more content more efficiently. But if you actually want just the efficiency, you miss the top line aspect of it, right? And so if you strategically actually plan, it's not just about more, it's quality, and you can get quantity. And you strategically approach that, you can impact that top line to impact the bottom line, right? So it's a nice circular way of explaining. It's a key component as omni-channel programs mature. Modular content should be part of the approach and strategic approach. It kind of goes back to building that consistency, building, that experience that healthcare providers want. And I do believe patients are consumers, healthcare providers are consumers. They interact with many hundreds of brands every day, and they see this, right? And so we should, as brands that represent healthcare organizations, brands that represent pharmaceuticals and products, we should also be providing that level of experience, and modular content is one way to actually get to that as well. So I think that's a really, really good point. I sort of want to shift our conversation, if you don't mind, to sort of getting to, implementation, execution, and sort of beyond that. At the end of the day, there's a large part of commercialization in the industry that's focused on building relationships. Mm-hmm. And, really great programs can help strengthen relationships. And so how can we start to think through, or how should people start to think through, not just the sales and healthcare provider relationship, but the multiple touch points, and that healthcare provider sort of, customer being the center of all of those interactions? How should we be thinking through that? How do we enhance those so that we can enhance loyalty?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is where I think we need to operate out of our silos. I think we talked about sort of the data piece of it, but I think more importantly, when you're talking about the customer at the center, you're talking about HCPs and prescribers, doctors, and who is touching that HCP. You have multiple people within your organization that are in different departments, right? So you've got commercially focused people, right? You've got a sales representative, you have a key account manager, you have a medical team as well. So you have an MSL, you may have a nurse ambassador, you may have clinical support specialist, you may have a field reimbursement manager on the market access side. All of these different stakeholders are touching the customer, and so to me, omnichannel has to be able to address that in the sense that we have to be able to, in the compliant ways that we can, break down those silos and have a level of transparency and visibility so that we have these different teams that are kind of seeing what is going on, what are we understanding about our customers, whether it's coming from the commercial side of things, if it's coming from the medical side of things, or from the market access side of things. That really helps us kind of bring all of that holistically to get that true customer 360 view of that customer, and then be able to tailor that approach. And I think that requires kind of going back to the culture piece. I think it does require maybe a bit of a mindset shift, and I think a lot of organizations are moving in that direction where, they're really thinking about the ways in which they can sort of have compliant collaboration across these different different teams, these different customer facing teams, and leverage insights in certain ways that support commercial objectives, that support medical objectives, that support market access objectives. So I think we're moving in that direction. There's probably more opportunity for us to grow there. I think it does require more conversations with our legal, privacy partners in our organizations, so that I think we're aligned in terms of the purpose and the vision and the goal, and how can we do that together to get there.
Yeah, I think truly, if we are striving for customer centricity versus brand centricity, you have to address each of these stakeholders who touch every customer, right? And so if we really think through the goal of each of these stakeholders, if you take a big step back, what are we all trying to accomplish? And what we're trying to accomplish is getting, again, our product top of mind and accessible to those stakeholders. And so I think if you can align around the common goal and weave that into all of the planning and the execution aspects, you could potentially get there. And I've seen organizations, I've talked to many organizations who do it really, really well. And there are some organizations who are still on that journey of incorporating. They start with sales and marketing. And I don't call those commercial teams, because there are aspects of medical affairs, like you said, the MSL team, or even medical directors who engage with customers who are commercially focused. And so those aspects, and how do you do that from a compliant standpoint? Those are the conversations. In my experience, what I've noted is the sooner you bring in that team, the compliance, the legal, and even the medical team, the sooner you bring them in to the conversation and help them understand what the ideal state would be, the better you can actually start to program and plan. Which leads me to a little bit, I'm going to get on a soapbox around, you said the two words that are like, always kind of words that trigger my thoughts around this: transparency and visibility. We're talking about data. You started this with, we have the luxury of having access to data. And, we can't have a conversation around data. We're talking about data of people, healthcare, right? And so I think it's of the utmost importance that we really do ensure that we have transparency on how we're using the data, as well as putting the guardrails on de-identifying every aspect of patient level data that we're using, and making sure that we're good stewards of that data that we're entrusted with. Because I think it's really, really important. Without data, none of this works, right? And so at the top of that heap is really making sure we're compliant and we follow the set rules, not just of the organization, but good practices from a risk standpoint as well, are really, really key. it's going to lead me to my next quick topic. And I know we can't have any conversation about commercialization or any business topic in this day and age without hitting the Gen AI and AI aspect of this, right? And so there's a lot. I have this big, bold vision. I talk a lot about omnichannel. You've heard me say this in the past, Tarak. Get omnichannel right today, because in the next 2 to 5 years, and I used to say 3 to 5, but that timeline continues to shrink because things are moving very, very quickly. We're going to have the opportunity to go from this omni-channel world, when you get it right, when you have all of this sort of integrated data, to then really leverage the Gen AI aspects of content development at scale, and turn on that content engine to be on so that you can hyper personalize information and messages to your entire audience, your healthcare providers, your patients, your caregivers, everyone that touches your brand. And simultaneously, you can actually automate a lot of your marketing campaigns through a Gen AI engine, right? So this goes beyond kind of the GPT aspects of it. We're going to now really putting Gen AI at the core and center of how we actually enable our marketing. So it's quite a shift. But if you don't have omnichannel, right, if you can't optimize your channels, I don't believe you can get to that future. I think the ethical considerations become even more profound because of the speed that this all moves. And that's my bold vision. But I'd love to hear your bold vision, because you also are an innovator. You obviously have educated yourself through a program at Stanford. I would love to hear sort of your perspective, what the big, bold vision of the future looks like, and how you're going to help your organization and other organizations navigate this.
Yeah. Yeah, no, thank you. I mean, I'd be the first to probably say I'm pretty bullish when it comes to AI in general. And I think, we have, I think, some great mature examples of how we're using AI and machine learning across the industry. And so I think that's become, I think, more of a mature application where we're actually seeing a lot of applications of that across many areas of the commercial model. I think the Gen AI piece is it's an interesting topic. I mean, I share your vision. I think Gen AI provides that capability that can help us to achieve that sort of North Star of how do we truly, personalize that content and that experience to that customer as an individual. I think it really depends, I think, on your level of maturity, where you are on the roadmap. So again, for a company that's just kind of, hitting the ground up and sort of building the omnichannel approach, it may not make sense, right? Because you don't really, you don't kind of have the tools and the capabilities to sort of get there. And I think just organizationally, your organization is probably not there as well. I think for a more mature, organization that has, proven capabilities, this could be a great opportunity. I think the ethical piece and, working with legal and regulatory, I'm hearing some examples, I think, of how companies are approaching this, and how they're using Gen AI tools to automate content creation at scale, using tools to be able to streamline that content review process. So it's great to see that we're seeing tactical applications of this actually being implemented into organizational operating models. I'd be curious to see what the results of the impact is. I think we're still sort of in that piloting, sort of testing and learning, and then kind of adapting our approaches from there.
And I think that's really where we should be. I can't even say a full handful. I know maybe 3 companies in the space that have jumped both feet in, creating their own internal AIs, and I think that's great. I think we need explorers like that to learn from. And if they've got the capacity and the opportunity to do that, we can learn a lot. But I do believe that most companies are in that test and learn phase. And look, you go to a conference and there are hundreds of solution providers there, right? And so picking the right one and making sure that you're partnering at the right level. My advice on this is really don't jump onto the AI bandwagon for the sake of jumping on. Have an end in mind. What are you looking to accomplish? And so is it better efficiency? Is it, content creation at scale? Is it the review process and actually creating the foundation of having a really efficient and quick review process so that when you get to content at scale, you've got that engine going, right? And so have an end in mind so that you can actually test and experiment with Gen AI tools. All right, so I want to open up for questions. We've got about 10 minutes left. So I think we've got a couple of questions from the audience. And actually, I'll start with one. I think we touched on this a bit, but we can expand a little bit. How does the regulatory environment in the life sciences impact the implementation of omnichannel strategies compared to other industries? The person's reflecting on emerging technologies. Do you see this as a game changer? So my perspective, listen, I've dug in deep in other industries. A lot of people like to say life sciences, especially pharma, is like the insurance industry. It's not. Yes, we are highly regulated like the insurance industry. We're highly regulated like financial services, but they're really different. The philosophy in those industries is innovate, and at some point, the innovation comes to fruition if there are no red flags. If there are red flags, then regulations come down. Within our industry, it's very, very different. The compliance regulatory environment is we have guardrails, and those guardrails are really strict. And you stay within those guardrails to actually commercialize and bring product to market. My method is you stay within those guardrails when you're ready to commercialize, but that does not mean you can't think outside of those guardrails to actually be bold and think through everything and then bring your ideas into the guardrails. Because if you don't think outside the guardrails, you might actually miss opportunities. But the key is once you actually brainstorm, think outside the guardrails, bring them into that regulatory environment in the guardrails. And I've always said, partner with your compliance officers, partner with your legal team up front so that they understand where you're trying to go, because their thinking is very different as well. And so as you're iterating, as you're going through those ideas, it's not a toss it across the wall and say, hey, will this work? It's we've come to this together so we understand that we're managing within the guardrails that our industry has put in place. And so I think that's really, really key. Tarak, I don't know if you have anything to add from that standpoint.
No, I think you said it really well, Shetal. I completely agree. I think now more than ever, because we operate in an industry where we are heavily regulated, and so it always has been, I think, a very close working relationship and partnership with regulatory compliance, legal, privacy. But I think now, with omnichannel, with I think with this sort of ecosystem that we're in today's environment, and also I think to the point you mentioned earlier about seeing external partners having more mature capabilities for AI and Gen AI, that partnership is more important than ever, right? And I think it really is important to involve those partners early on. They do understand what you're trying to accomplish. What is the problem you're trying to solve for? Why do you feel like this is the best way to do it? This is the best solution that we need to implement, and working through that to make sure that we're doing it in the most compliant way that we can, and respecting our privacy policies and all of that.
Yeah, absolutely great. Here's another good question that's come through. How would you see companies measuring trust? Multiple ways. I think, obviously market research and formal research to understand, through, quarterly ATUs, understanding the value that you're creating with your customers. I also think engagement is a really great way to measure trust. But Tarak, I'll hand it to you because you've got a lot more expertise around this than I do around that customer engagement aspect and measuring these things.
Yeah, I mean, I think from my experience, it is using market research tools like voice of the customer, net promoter score, um, where you can specifically target your audiences, your customers. But I think also I would add that there's other ways that you can get those type of insights, maybe in a more sort of accelerated way by leveraging social media and social listening, or you can also capture customer sentiment through those channels as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's great. Thank you for the questions. Tarak, any last thoughts or insights that you want to share with our audience before we close? Because I think we're going to be up on time in a few minutes.
I just want to say thanks so much again for the opportunity. Just really enjoy the conversation. It's always a joy to have these sort of practical conversations about omnichannel and sort of where we're going as an organization and where we're going as an industry. So really enjoy the conversation, and thanks again for the opportunity.
Yeah, thanks for joining, Tarak. I really enjoyed the conversation as well. I hope the audience got some good levels of insight. Again, if you have any questions on Aquent, any of the products that Aquent offers, Elizabeth Svensson, who is the head of Aquent's Pharma and Life Sciences group, can answer those, and her email is in the chat. If there are any offline questions, we'd be happy to collect those and put those out as well. So if you can email those to Elizabeth, we've captured the chat ones as well. Thank you again to Aquent for hosting this. Thank you for the Aquent marketing team who's behind the scenes making all of this happen. And Tarak, thank you so much for joining. Really enjoyed the conversation. Hope everyone has a great afternoon, evening. I think it's still morning in parts of where we are. So have a great day, everyone.